Welcome to the Adventure Pro podcast. Interviews, stories and inspiration from amazing people that have made adventure their business. Today's guest on the podcast is a worldwide adventurer, expedition leader and public speaker. She's currently just one peak away from completing the 7 summits and has raised thousands of pounds and awareness for children's mental health charity Place to Be. If you're looking for an inspirational video, then check out her website, jobradshaw.co.uk. Highly recommended. Welcome to the podcast, Jo Bradshaw.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Jo, the first time I learned about you is interestingly by seeing your van. I understand you've now replaced the Subtle bus, but can you tell us a little bit about it and why it was so distinctive, should we say?
Oh, bless my bright yellow van. Yeah, when I started working, or when I went freelance in 2010, I needed to get a van, and it was suggested that I get a medium roof Transit by an outdoor instructor called Mick Jones, who you may know, Summit Mountain Skills. Yeah, so I went out and found a bright yellow medium roof Transit, which actually is an ex-JCB van. It was very robust, but it was the JCB colours. So I nicknamed it the Subtle bus because obviously it was not so subtle. And then when all of the Everest stuff kicked off, and the fundraising, I had it logoed, so it was even less subtle. Even less subtle, I don't know, whatever the words are for that. And then so I had that for 8 years, and in 2018 I sold it, and I now have still a Transit, medium roof short wheelbase Transit, but it's white with lots of logos on it as well, so sign rising. So it's still not subtle either, but yeah, there you go.
Well, it definitely does what it says on the.
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah, so on this one, I actually have a really good map of the world with the 7 summits on. And if I'm if I'm in a car park or something ready to go out to checkpoint DV groups and there's families around, you'll hear families looking at the map and teaching their kids about where things are in the world. So
brilliant. It
has more of a purpose than just Place to Be. And people do stop and ask me what I'm up to and, what's going on. So it's definitely a van with a purpose, that's for sure.
Absolutely, there's no mistaking it. Definitely. I'm really interested to hear who bought it. Was it someone else called Jo?
No, I don't know. It was a lovely lady called Anne, and actually I think she's passed it on now to somewhere else. So so it is now being not so subtle somewhere else in England. I'm not sure where, which is a shame. But it was a great van, and did me very well for a lot of thousands of miles I was driving over those 8 years. So yeah.
Oh, fabulous! It really is a stroke of master marketing. It really is. When I saw it, wow, that's punchy.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, well, if you're going to go bold, I think,
Absolutely.
Let's go for it. So.
I'm with you. So, Jo, it wasn't always like this. So if we take a step back and give listeners an idea of what life looked like, 10 years ago or even longer than that, because you say on your website that you went from suits and business events to jeans, walking boots, and a new way of life. So what was that process?
Well, it was it seemed to happen quite quickly, but it actually, for me, it happened over quite a few years' time. So I'll tell you back to when I left school. I wanted to work with horses, and which I did for about 6-7 years. But it wasn't towards the end of my time working with the horses, and I was running yards and sort of training competition horses, wasn't really working out. I think the dream and the reality had moved far apart, especially when I got into my mid-20s, and I'd managed to work for a few not particularly brilliant employers, which can have quite a bit of an impact. So I left horses and just needed to get a job, went into retail because that's a good into anything, and worked my way up through management and then into other industries. And for those 10 years, I felt a bit lost in the world, knowing that it wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. But I didn't know. But the rest of your life is a long time, isn't it? So it's like,
Indeed.
you know, when you sort of see students on DV or something, and you're like, so what do you want to do when you leave school? And they're like, what, for the rest of my life? I'm like, the rest of your life is a long time. You know, that's 40 or 50 years. Who knows what they want to do for the rest of your life? So, but I knew I didn't want to be continuing to work in business because it was too structured for me. It was too 9 to 5. And I actually then went and worked for an organisation called Business Link, which was then a government funded business support organisation. I've still got all the spiel for it as well. And it was a much more flexible agenda of work. So I would be doing networking events in the morning, and then I'd have a couple of hours off, and then I'd have meetings with clients trying to sort of work out how to get the best for their business out of the government and funding streams, and also through other businesses. So sort of pairing them up with like-minded businesses. And then I may be at a networking event in the evening. So it was very flexible. And I really enjoyed it. You know, helping people is something I love doing. And I really enjoyed it, but it got to a stage where the funding for Business Link was changing. I'd been promoted to what was called a partnership manager, and that role was going to be disbanded. I was in line to get a job with the council where I was living at the time, up in Buckinghamshire, to work on business development, but it wasn't an area that I was passionate about. And I think if you want to go into a role like that, you have to be passionate about it. So it wasn't for me. And it just happened to work in the same time that I had taken part in a bike ride in Peru for a charity, which is something I never thought I'd do because I was not a risk taker. I was not adventurous in the sort of grand scheme of things. I hadn't camped since I was a kid, you know, all these things. And it was actually a friend that had suggested that I go and try and be a bit more adventurous. She could obviously see that I wasn't happy with what I was doing, so why not go and try other things? And I was very much a no-sayer back then. You know, I'd say yes to a lot of stuff and then end up turning around and saying, no, I can't do it because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But it was that bike ride, which then led on to 2 more with the same company, Discover Adventure, who are based down in Salisbury. And on the 3rd one, which was in Cuba, which was a personal challenge, I was just chatting to the leader of, you know, like we all get asked, how did you get into this? And she was actually a GP, and she led expeditions on our holidays from work. So I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. You know, I could maybe sort of cruise some trips and do that. So she said, just get in touch with the company, send your CV in, they'll have you down for a sort of selection weekend and see where it goes. And that was so I came down to Salisbury in 2007 for a weekend that probably was the pinnacle of changing my life. Not in a sort of sudden big way, but it was the step to then crewing some trips, and then I started leading for Discover Adventure, and then they offered me a job in the office. And it was the beginning of 2008 that I moved my life from Buckinghamshire down to Wiltshire, rented out my own house, went into rented accommodation, sold my fancy car, you know, just all of the big changes that move job, move house. My dog died as well because he had cancer, bless him. All of those sort of big life events happened in about a month. It was a bit,
wow,
you know, and I went from even though it was very flexible at Business Link, you know, but we were suits and smart and, you know, proper business meetings to and an office in the city, to working in an old chicken shed, which DA used to be in. I mean, it was a very posh chicken shed, in jeans and a t-shirt with the dogs in a kennel in the garden, you know, watching the sun come down over Wiltshire. It was just such a massive shift change. And I was then working, you know, 9 to 5, although adventure is never 9 to 5, but I was also leading trips, doing recce. So it was quite an exciting time of putting my business skills into good practice within within Discover Adventure,
yeah,
but also gaining new skills out leading and crewing and doing recce's, and sort of suddenly thrust into this really exciting adventure world where you get tired really quickly because regular hours don't work. So yeah, it was quite a change.
Yeah, so you were working full time, you were going away. How often were you going overseas at that point?
I did, because I was at DA for a couple of years working in the office, and I probably went away every other month. And that was a mixture of overseas trips. So I assisted on a Kili when I was in the office. I led a Peru trip, did Cuba a couple of times, and also doing London to Paris. So I was, so probably every other month I would say I was away, but it never really works that, you know, it's not as regular as that. So, and then getting back and doing all the office stuff as well. So I was dealing with the open challenge clients, and that number grew from 500 to 1,000 in the 2 years I was there. So it was a massive growth.
It's huge.
Yeah, huge. So, and that's a lot of people to deal with, you know.
It really is. Yeah.
But having been a client of DA's, I knew what they were going through. And then when I was leading trips and having been a client, I understood again what they were going through. So I had quite a bit of empathy for, you know, for the anxieties and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Cool. So you've been working there for a couple of years, and then was there a pivotal moment? Was there something that happened that you then thought, right, I need a big challenge for myself, or I need to start doing things for myself?
Yeah, it was. I think it was about the November time during the second year. So coming up towards the end of my second year there, and I was having my appraisal with Johnny, who owns the company, and he said, look, you know, the open challenges are taking off and we need you in the office. So and in my contract it actually said I'd be allowed out 3 times a year. So and they were putting me on these trips. You know, it was good for me to have a good range of understanding of what the trips are like, and so it was easier to sell them and also be more informed. But when he said, oh, you know, we're going to have to sort of rein in you going out, I was like, oh, I'm not sure that's not what I want. I didn't move, you know, all this way and halve my salary and, you know, live in a rented house and all of this to be sat in an office watching other people have adventures. I could have stayed and had a good job and still done more trips during my holidays, working or personally. So I said to him, well, if I went freelance, then would you still provide me with lots of work? He was like, yeah, I don't want to see you go, but yeah, for sure. So I then put into place, you know, sort of a diary of work with Discover Adventure, and then working out what I was going to do in between that. And that's when the Duke of Edinburgh stuff came in. And also I started leading for a schools expedition company called True Adventure. It's all about the adventure. So beginning of 2010, I went freelance. Yeah, end of January 2010. And that was a scary moment because, you know, up from the time even when I was with horses, actually, I was an employed person. I got sick pay, you know, pension, holidays, all of the stuff that we probably take for granted a lot when you are employed by a company,
Yeah.
and went freelance, and feel that I have earned every single penny of my invoices ever since, with no sick pay and no paid holiday. But even though my pay isn't still at the scale as it was at DA, and it wasn't huge then, my richness in life is so much greater than it was when I was in business, before the Discover Adventure days. So yeah, I wouldn't change it.
How do you think your life has improved?
The flexibility I really like, so that no 2 days are the same. I can choose, to a certain extent, I choose the work that I want to do. So if I, and it's hard to make ends meet when you're doing this job, if you have a mortgage, or, even rent is higher than mortgages, and it is hard to make ends meet. And you're away a lot, and you miss, family events and friends' weddings and all of this sort of stuff. But that's a choice that I've made, to go and see this big wide world we live in, and encourage others to live more adventurously. And there's a huge amount of satisfaction in knowing that my skills are improving, but also I am encouraging others to believe in themselves more, and I think for me, that's the most rewarding part of the job, and that's what I didn't get in business. It was great when I matched up a couple of companies and they then went on to form a bond and their businesses grew. That was great. Or when I got funding for a business through a different arm of government funding, that was brilliant. But it was sort of more isolated occasions. Whereas now, if I take a group of 10 on Kilimanjaro, 10 people are going to come away from that, whether they've summited or not, with new skills, a new sense of self-worth, a new understanding of what they're capable of. And that then goes back into their lives at home and in business and wherever, and can take them places that they never thought that they could go, with, just as it did with me when I was a client. So yeah, it's very empowering.
Absolutely. So you're working freelance, and you've got a number of companies that you're working for. What brought about the Seven Summits Challenge?
It kind of snuck up on me, actually. It was
as it does. Yeah.
It does, yeah. A lot of people who go for the Seven Summits sort of start with Kili as a sort of green client, and then like, well, there's only 6 more to do, so I'll give it a go. The other 6 are quite hard, but it didn't work like that for me. So I did Kili through work, and
can we actually just for people that don't know what the 7 summits are, could you just
Sure.
explain?
So it's the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, cool. And they all have their own challenges. So you've got, Everest is the highest, and not everybody, but most people know Everest and what it's all about through the media. And the challenges on there versus the lowest one, which is Carsten's Pyramid in Indonesia, which currently is shut because of civil unrest. And it's a 1-day rock climb, because you now have to helicopter into base camp, which is at 4,200 meters. So that's an instant headache. So you've got, because you now can't walk through the jungle for 6 days to get there. So they have all of the 7 have very unique challenges, and are very different mountains. Culturally, they're all very different. The feel you get on them is very different. And that's what I love about them, because it's not like you're repeating the same thing 7 times. You're doing 7 different things in essence. There's obviously definite crossovers. So, but yeah, they're all unique in their own little ways. So, or big ways, depending on the height. So, yeah. So Kilimanjaro was my first, not that I knew it then, but back in 2008 is the first time I climbed it, and I've guided on it many times since. And then in the end of 2011, I climbed Aconcagua in Argentina as a personal challenge. So my uncle had passed away the year before and left me a little bit of money, and it was my 40th birthday in the March. So I went and climbed a mountain in Nepal called Mirror Peak, which then led on to Aconcagua 6 months later. And again, I was, at that point, I hadn't even clocked the 7 summits. It wasn't a thing for me. I just was climbing the mountains for their own challenges rather than going, oh, I need to tick them off because it's a run of 7 or what have you. So, and then, so that was 2011. And then in 2013, quite a few things happened in those 2 years in between. But then my next sort of big challenge was an 8,000er called Manaslu, which is sort of central Nepal. And it's the 8th highest mountain in the world. And I'd never thought I was capable of climbing any of these mountains. And it was a guide friend called Rolf Oostra, who I worked with him at Discover Adventure, and we led a couple of trips together. And he basically kept telling me, yes, you can do stuff. And quite honestly, it was to get me on as a client, because another client is great. But he wouldn't suggest I go and climb an 8,000er if he didn't think I was capable. And I couldn't see it in myself. But I was like, okay, well, I will say yes to this and give it everything I've got, because other people are telling me that I am capable. So I need to listen. So we went and climbed Manaslu in September 2013. And it was only then that I sort of thought, well, I've done one 8,000er plus a load of other stuff. So maybe I do have the right attributes to go and climb Everest. And I led a trip to Everest Base Camp straight after climbing Manaslu. And I remember getting to Everest Base Camp, or actually to Gorak Shep, and looking up at Everest. And my clients, who are a lovely, lovely bunch, like, brilliant, so that's what you're going to do. I'm like, no, it's too dangerous and it's too expensive and it's a journalistic nightmare and circus and everyone has an opinion about it. And, it just didn't hold that sort of pull that it does for a lot of other people because of all the stuff that happens around it. And I didn't think people like me, who got into climbing, relatively late, and I was still quite new in my climbing career. I was sort of 4 or 5 years in at that point. I didn't think people like me were capable of it. So, and that was my own negativity. Other people were saying to me, of course you can go and do it. Why would you think you can't? And it was me going, no, it was just fear, and you have to go across ladders and big crevasses. I mean, that's just stupid. But anyway, so and a lot of it is serendipity. A lot of it is sliding door moments when, and I remember the beginning of 2014, Rolf's wife Marnie, because they run a business called 360 Expeditions, who I guide for, she rang me up and she said, look, we're forming a team for Everest in 2015, and you're more than capable of being there. And I actually said yes straight away, because I think after Manaslu, it had been bubbling over. So I said yes, I put my deposit down, and then thought, Christ, I've got less than a year to raise quite a lot of money and get to be the fittest I've ever been in my life. And it was the money that I was more concerned about, because it's not a cheap expedition.
Yeah.
And again, it's another sliding door moment. I was leading a trip. I was leading in London to Paris, and a particular client was on it who was then on another bike ride that I was then crewing. So we got chatting and got to know each other a little bit. And it was a colleague of mine who was cycling with the group who actually was sort of planting the seeds, so saying, look, she's off to climb Everest and you've, raising funds for this amazing charity, and could you put the two together? And he he said yes. He put, he funded my expeditions costs for Everest in 2015, and I went and raised a load of money for Place to Be and raising the profile of the charity, because that all helps as well. That's as important as the fundraising. And it's, again, I was like, well, this is crazy. People like me don't get to do stuff. Well, of course they do, because I proved that, it's just, I was in the right place at the right time with the right people. And a lot of life is like that, isn't it? You are given these opportunities that if it was the wrong place, the wrong person, they wouldn't happen. So it was definitely this. I'm not getting all woo-woo, but it was definitely the stars aligned that day. So off we went in 2015, and I had also put together a group of 6 DV Gold students to do their residential, which usually is a 5-day something in the UK, but we trekked to Everest Base Camp and then climbed a 6,000 meter peak. It's not a bad residential.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, and they went home, and Rolf and I went up to base camp, back up to base camp, which is where we were going to be for the next month, and started climbing the mountain. And then the earthquake happened 10 days after we got to base camp, which ended that particular climb. So yeah, that was a moment in time I never expected to happen. And then it came home early because we couldn't climb any higher. The mountain was shut that season. And then I needed to get back to the mountains, and I wasn't actually going to be leading another trip to I think I was doing Kili in September or something, but I needed to get back on the snow and ice so that mentally I could just, get back in my happy place. And 360 were running an expedition on Elbrus, which is the European one of the 7 summits. And I had a bit of time in my diary, and so I went out and assisted Rolf on that. Unfortunately, got to the summit just before the weather really kicked off, as it does on that mountain. And it wasn't, even at that point, it wasn't like I was stitching them all together. It was just so happened that is what I was doing. And then I went back to Everest in 2016. And it was after Everest 2016 that my sponsor had said, right, now what's next? You've done Everest. So send me a proposal of what can, still get a lot of money for the charity and more awareness. So I thought of a few things, first for a British female, there's a few 8,000er that haven't been climbed by British females, although Adele Pennington is ticking them off nicely, which is great. I'm a massive fan of hers. But it's not as for sort of promotion. A lot of people would be like, well, so what? Because so many people haven't heard of quite a lot of the 8,000 meter peaks. So I was sort of thinking of other ideas, and then I was thinking, well, I've done 4 of the 7 summits, and I have 3 left, and there's only around 500 people in the world that have managed to finish the 7.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, I know, and it's you think it's going to be a lot more, and only about, I think there's maybe 12 British females now, and about, I think, 40 or so chaps. So it's actually quite a small number, considering everybody talks about, well, not everybody, that's a real generalization, but it's heard of quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think because so many people start it and saying, right, I'm going to climb the 7 summits and I'm going to do it in X amount of time, or, be the first, whatever. And for me, it wasn't about a time period, thankfully. It was about completing them and doing them properly and raising funds for Place to Be and taking them on this journey with me. So the next mountain in the series was Denali in Alaska. And it's a mountain I've always wanted to climb. I read Mark Beaumont's book, The Man Who Cycled the Americas.
Yeah.
And I read that, I think, in about 2012. And he summited Aconcagua as he was cycling down. No, sorry, summited Denali as he was cycling south, and then did Aconcagua to finish before he then went all the way down to the bottom. And his description in that book just made it sound like this most magical place. And he actually did a documentary about it as well. And the views were incredible. And again, I thought, well, that's, you carry everything and you pull everything, and there's, you work as a team as in yourselves. There's no sort of tent to put up. You do everything. I'm like, am I capable of doing that? And I'm like, I have to be. I'm doing 7 summits. I need to quit this ridiculous am I capable and just go and find out, So yeah, so I got training for Denali, picked up a 23 kilo tractor tire, started dragging that around the New Forest in North Wales, and then went out to Alaska in June of 2017. And when we arrived, the summit success for that season so far, it'd been going a month, was I think 12%, which is, I mean, it's usually only about 30% anyway. So, and we were like, okay, so we're going to be up against it. The weather had been pretty poor.
And is it the weather that brings that percentage down?
Yeah, generally the weather. I think a lot of people underestimate the mountain because you do carry and pull everything. So your level of fitness needs to be greater. I mean, we were carrying 20 kilo rucksacks and pulling 30, 40 kilo sleds. It's hard work. And your distances aren't that great each day. And you do a lot of so for camp 1, you take everything in. So that's a hard day. And then the next night, because lower down on the mountain, you climb at night and sleep during the day. And it's 24-hour daylight. So it's just a bit brighter during the day than it is at night, but it's still daylight. So we'll go halfway up to camp 3, because there's no camp 2, and cache them equipment and then come back down. And then the next day we'll take what we have at camp and go up to camp 3. And then the following night we then come down and pick up what we had at the old camp 2 that we had cached, and then take it back up. So you sort of do this system where you're not actually carrying everything, and it's good for acclimatization as well. And then when we're higher up on the mountain, we then switch to daytime climbing, which is a joy. Because trying to sleep during the day when it's suddenly really hot and then it gets really cold and then the sun comes out and then it's behind a cloud, it completely screws with your brain. But it was the most amazing expedition, and I would go back there with a heartbeat. And we summited, even the morning that we were due to summit, we didn't know if we could because of the weather. And we got the all clear at sort of 10 a.m. And at 10:30 in the morning, we set out, and we arrived back at high camp 10:30 at night. So it was a 12-hour round trip, and it was the most perfect weather, and the team were incredible, and there was hardly anyone else around. And it was a year, a month, and a day to when I'd summited Everest the year before. But for me, it felt much more of a personal victory because we had climbed it ourselves. We had set up our tents, we dug the toilet pits. I'd carried 7 kilos of shit uphill by mistake, all of this sort of stuff, all these stories that come out from the mountains. The team were amazing. Not everybody made it, which is always hard when you're in a very close-knit team. But it was incredible. I absolutely loved it. So yeah, that was number 5.
Your favourite so far, then?
Oh, favourite so far, yeah, 100%, yeah. I think it's because of the self-supported element. You are as strong as the rest of your team, and vice versa. And I trained my backside off for that, for that trip. I trained incredibly hard for Everest and I was super fit for those. But I needed to be stronger for Denali because we were carrying and pulling so much weight. And the weather conditions were pretty brutal. And so either there's a lot of waiting in camp or there's a lot of sudden go. So yeah, it's a whole different ball game to Everest, which you're on, from Lukla to Lukla, it took us 47 days. So Lukla is where you fly in to the, into the Khumbu to start walking up to Everest Base Camp. And it was 45 days up with a lot of acclimatization rotations, and it's a sort of 12-day trek into base camp, and everything takes longer. And then we had a week of bad weather, so we had to come down and all of this sort of stuff. But it's, 47 days is a long time. And Denali felt like a much more intense 18 days. And we all stank afterwards. It was just...
I can only imagine.
You carry, the more kit you carry, the heavier your stuff. So, and I remember in the hotel in Anchorage, our guide, Andy, our head guide, absolutely fabulous guy. And he's like, we were doing a kit check, because once you're out there, you're out there. You can't just, go into Namche and buy a few pairs of socks or what have you. So he said, look, I don't want to see your underwear, but just to let you know, putting it out there, I'm only taking one pair of pants. I'm like, so you're wearing the same pair of pants for 3 weeks? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, I'm taking 3, just to have a little bit of a change. But you are in what you're in for 3 weeks, and you layer up. But there's no, oh, I'll just put my pajamas on now. It's like, no, I'll just take my trousers off and I've got my thermals on, and that's where you stay. So wet wipes are minimum. Everything is minimum. So it was a really good lesson in really dealing with not very much for 3 weeks, but you knew it was going to end. So it wasn't, it's not hardship really. You knew it was going to end. And when we got back to Talkeetna at the end, I was sharing with another British female, Linda, and she went out to go and buy something. And I'd been in the shower and she came back in and she was like, holy cow. And it's not surprising. I mean, we were, it was great. I loved it. So, and I think that type of environment, it was you and your team, you had to pull your weight. And it teaches you very quickly how to get on with a team of, I mean, this was an international team as well, so it wasn't as if we were all Brits or what have you. And there was 9 guys, myself and Linda, who are British. Of the guys, we had a Slovakian called Zoltan, who was amazing. We had a Swede, a Croatian, and some Americans, and then 3 American guides. And I met some great people on the mountain, but it's not busy, which was nice as well. So you didn't feel that, it was overrun with people. And we had the summit to ourselves. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Just 5 of us stood on the summit. So yeah, amazing. Yeah.
And then the next peak.
So then, and this is where it all changed a little bit. So that was June 2017. And I'd been chatting to my sponsor in September 2017. He said, look, just go and do castings. And we'll sort of not get it out of the way, but get that one done. Anyway, unfortunately, in the October, my father became very seriously ill and passed away early December. So, the climb was off for then. And I was then going to do it the end of January 2018. And a week before I was due to fly out, my sponsor had to unfortunately pull out financially. And I was still dealing with, very early on in the grief of losing my dad, as well as having to cancel the expedition at short notice, And I just sort of thought, right, I need to put this on hold for now, because I'm not mentally in the right place to go and climb quite a technical mountain. At the time, you could walk in, so I would have had a 6-day walk in through the jungle with me and a guide, and it's probably not mentally the best place to go and do that after losing your dad. So I put it on hold for a year, and then came back to it at the beginning of 2019, and I was on my own, no sponsorship. So I was like, right, how am I going to raise the money to do Carsten's Pyramid and to do Vincent? And Vincent in Antarctica is an expensive mountain. It's expensive to get there. So Kiko Matthews, who is an adventurer and has rode the Atlantic Ocean, she did the 100 Club. So she enticed 100 women to donate £1,000 to the charity she was supporting, and also to fund her row. And I was thinking, well, I could do that as well. It's a great, why reinvent the wheel? So I set up what was called Jo's Mighty 90, and that was to entice 90 people to donate £1,000. And up to a certain point, half of the money would go to Place to Be, and half would fund the cost of the expedition, because one wasn't going to happen without the other. I wasn't going to raise thousands of pounds for Place to Be without doing something quite extreme or quite difficult, or it's going to put me in in an uncomfortable place, because that's what people want to see you do. Yeah. And it worked well up to a certain point. But with Carsten's, I actually self-funded that, and we were due to go out. So I was due to go out to Carsten's the end of September 2019, and then Vincent was due to be my final of the 7, if all went according to plan, at the end of 2019. So I was going to Antarctica in December, and 24 hours before we were due to fly, I'd literally just finished packing my bag, because I was flying out to Carsten's and then I was flying straight over to Kili to lead a trip. So it was a bit of a complicated pack. And I just put the last thing in my bag and was just about to do a post on Instagram. And I saw this post from another organisation saying Carsten's closed. And this was Saturday night, 8 o'clock Saturday night. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. It's got to be a hoax. It's got to be a joke. It can't be. This cannot be for real. And so I messaged my agent straight away, and he got back to me and he said, look, I've literally got back in the office from seeing the Army and the Ministry of Tourism and all the people that we need. And civil unrest had broken out in West Papua, where Carsten is. And they were getting tourists out really quickly. And even the locals were fleeing. So where you fly into in West Papua is a town called Tamika. And if the locals are getting out of the town, you know that we're not going to be safe there either. And the mountain was shut. So that was it. That was the end of that attempt. And he said, look, we'll reschedule it. So we rescheduled it for the beginning of March 2020. And before COVID hit properly, we had to cancel the expedition again, because I think the mountain opened for maybe a couple of weeks over Christmas that year, 2019. And I was in Antarctica at the time, and so couldn't go. And then beginning of February, the mountain was shut. No, beginning of January, the mountain was shut and wasn't going to reopen. So we then put it on hold again. And then obviously COVID kicked off, and so yeah, Carsten's is still to be rescheduled, and we'll go when it's safe. It's not safe to go. The mountain is officially shut. And I was talking about it to somebody today who also wants to climb, and he was like, well, we'll go in September. I said, well, nobody knows when they're going to go, because if the civil unrest is still too bad, they're not going to allow a load of rich Westerners in, all to be kidnapped and God knows what. So, yeah, we'll wait. I don't want to put anyone else's life at risk trying to protect me on a mountain just because I want to finish climbing these 7 summits. So I went to Antarctica instead. So that was number 6. And it's quite a hard place to get at. It's very expensive, but also the weather has to be really good between Punta Arenas in Chile and Antarctica, because they can't land in Antarctica if there's any cloud or fog. So we were put back a couple of days with bad weather days. And then on the 3rd day, we were told that there was an error with the paperwork for our flight.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
me and 80 other climbers and some crew and lots of equipment to go onto Antarctica. So, and they said this was, I think, the 21st of December. We may not be able to go until after Christmas. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding. For a lot of people, they had a time slot. I mean, and I could have stayed out there, but it's expensive to stay, and I probably would have been sleeping on a park bench in the end. Unfortunately, the next day they got it sorted. So 4:00, we got everybody on our flight, got a message saying, get to the ALE office at 6. And then I think we were in the air by 10 or something. So yeah, it was a really quick turnaround. And I said to the organisers, I'm like, whatever you've done is a miracle. Thank you. This is just, a dream come true to be able to go to Antarctica. And funding for that, I'd part funded it through Joe's 1990, and I'd had to put the rest of it on credit card because I just needed to pay the bill and get there. And that's since been covered by my dearly deceased granny, bless her. So, I know, it's dead relatives have funded my climbing, which is really sad. But thank you very much, wherever you are.
I'm sure they'd want it that way.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. And it was such a, when you get there, because it's 24 hours daylight again, but generally just bright the whole time. And we arrived at 2 a.m. and it could have been midday, so we had some dinner, and then you go and sleep in these amazing pod tents. And the next morning we flew out to Vincent Base Camp, and summited on the 27th of December, which is the same date that I actually summited Aconcagua. So I've done the 2nd and the 6th on the same date, but a few years in apart. So yeah, and it was an amazing climb. I loved it. It was brilliant. What a magical place to go.
Bet.
Yeah.
So what do you think some of the biggest misconceptions about climbing big, high mountains?
I think one of them is that you need to be rich to do it, because I am definitely not, and that you need to be a bloke to do it, and I'm clearly definitely not. And you need to be big and strong physically, and I am strong. I'm not particularly big. So I think those 3 are quite up there, and that maybe you need to be younger to do it. And I'm now 50, and I'm going to carry on climbing until my knees give out. So, so yeah, I think those are because you can. I mean, I was, and I will always say that I am very fortunate with Everest to have met, like I said earlier, met the right person at the right time, and who not only gave me 1 shot at Everest, but gave me 2, because when the earthquake struck and we actually got back to base camp 2 days later, we were helivaced back down. And then we started digging for our kit. And 2 days after that, I managed to find my mobile phone. And I was just trying to find general kit because everything had just been blasted away. It was a very weird situation. And I found my mobile phone and I stuck it on a rock, and it was a bright sunny day, and I warmed it up and it worked amazingly. And I messaged my mum saying that I was back in proper contact. And then I messaged my sponsor to say, sorry, I'm still alive, but, didn't quite make it. Because his parting shot to me when I last saw him in August the year before was come back alive. It's probably not the best thing. I mean, it's a bit like saying break a leg to an actor, I guess. But yeah, so I think he was probably a little bit worried when the earthquake struck that he'd sort of doomed me to being encased in ice forever. But yeah, I said sorry, he didn't make it, and we started having a conversation on text, and I was sat in my tent, sort of the phone on a boot in the porch trying to get some signal, and he was in London somewhere, and he said, would you go back? And I was like, yeah, definitely. Because it wasn't anything that we'd done wrong to stop the climb. It was Mother Nature having a really bad day. And he said, great, I'll fund you to go back next year and you carry on your fundraising for Place to Be and we'll see how it goes. And I think he saw the merit in the not giving up side of things, which was so important when you're dealing with mental health and all of that side of stuff, is that if somebody gives you a chance and says you can, then you need to sort of take that opportunity. And mentally, it really rocked me massively, the earthquake. I was in quite a bad place for a bit. And, really found solace in the mountains again. So it didn't. A few of my friends said, look, if you didn't go back and you never climbed again, people would not, they'd think no less of you. And I was like, no, I need to go back. I need to make peace in the mountains and stuff. And I felt, on Denali, I felt a tremor, and been to Nepal since, and I've just been walking along up towards base camp and have felt the tremor. And it's a bit of a weird, when you're very in tune to it now, it's very straight. I mean, even I was sat on my sofa one Saturday afternoon in Salisbury, which is where I live, felt a tremor, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. And there was one in Swindon or somewhere not very far away. It's like, God, I'm in Wiltshire, for God's sake. There are no tectonic plates around here. So yeah, I couldn't say no to that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Jo, I want to be respectful of your time, and we'll wind the conversation up soon. I always ask 3 questions to all guests at the end. So the first question is, what piece of advice would you give to yourself 10 years ago?
Believe in yourself more. Yeah, for sure. Because I was very, and I still am a bit, people bandy around imposter syndrome. And I'm not so keen on the syndrome part of it, but there are definite moments, especially in my early days, and still now actually, where I sometimes feel someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and go, back in your box, love. This is just a dream. But this is reality. I've worked really hard and given up a lot of stuff in order to gain more. And yeah, I think just probably be a bit bolder earlier on. Yeah, don't take no for an answer. Don't believe people who tell you can't. Even Brilliant. Yourself, that's the inner critic in us. Don't we? Oh no, I can't do that. Well, why not? Give it a go.
Yeah, your inner sabotage.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and I have 2 characters that I use. So I have negative Nelly and positive Polly. And Nelly can have a proper go, can't they? Or Animate Enough uses the soldiers of self-doubt and the cheerleaders, and the negative energy or the negativity that can go around in your brain, and the self-sabotage is quite powerful. And you just need to sort of flick them off your shoulder or kick them where it hurts or whatever works for you, and just go, no, I can do this. I absolutely can. Yeah. And if it doesn't work out, you've learned a load of stuff, and it puts you in a better position for then doing something else after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Question number 2 then. What valuable resource, so it could be a book, a YouTube channel, piece of equipment, blog, podcast app or other, can you recommend to help others following a similar path to you?
I think I've been thinking about this since you sent me the questions, and I would say podcasts are really valuable, and not just because we're recording one now, but if you're wanting to get into the outdoors, is listening to other people who have done it from all walks of life and from any age. And I got into it very late, well, not late, but relatively late compared to a lot of people that I work with who have been in the outdoors since they left school, you know. So hunt out those people who you want to emulate, and get into contact with them. I have people, you know, sort of asking to chat to me, is like, well, how did you do it? How is it going to work for me? You know, it's because there will be some piece of advice in there somewhere that helps somebody, whether it's, well, don't give up your day job just yet, but sort of gradually go over to, totally give up your day job. This is what you know, are destined to go and do, and it's working out. And podcasts are great for that. You know,
can you recommend any podcasts?
Oh gosh.
Don't worry if
no, but there's so many. So Dave Cornthwaite has done brilliant podcasts. Al Humphreys. There's a fabulous lady out in France called Katie Friend who has Chatting to a Friend. Sarah Williams from Tough Girl Challenges. So that's
that's four.
That's
Brilliant.
a good range for. And there's two, and obviously on the podcast, once you start listening to one adventure podcast, it then starts recommending others, and also go for people that you've never heard before as well, who are being interviewed. Because if you listen to the same people over and over again, you maybe learn new things, little snippets, but if you listen to people you don't even know about, then they have this whole other skill set, and there may be something in there that's, you know, that may be useful. So sure, podcasts are great.
And if you're doing as much traveling as you and I do normally, there's plenty of time to do it, isn't there?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm going on a 15-mile tire drag tomorrow, so that'll be about,
as you do,
like you do, 6 hours or something. So that's a good audio book and a few good podcasts. So I plug my ears in and off I go.
Just on a side note, how do you plot a route for a tire drag?
I use my OS app. So, the app for Ordnance Survey is really good. So I don't take a paper map with me.
Yeah.
And I do it wherever, you know, if I'm working in South Wales or North Wales and I need to work out tire drag, I know the areas quite well, but it's also really good looking at the contour lines and, you know, where I can officially drag it. I mean, you can drag it on roads or wherever, but safe places.
Yeah.
So where I live here in Salisbury, I go to the New Forest a lot. So I've plotted a route on my OS app for 15 miles, you know, in various parts of the forest.
So
that's going to be a fun day out.
Sounds like it rather than me. So the final question, what would you like to see change about the adventure industry?
So again, I've thought about this quite a lot. I would like to see pay improve, because we work really hard for very long hours for relatively small amount of pay. But then if the pay went up, then the cost to the clients goes up, which then has an impact. And it's not just pay for us in the UK, but it's also relatively, you know, relative to the pay the crews get. And the companies I work for pay the local crews really well, and they're parts of porter unions and the like out there. So their conditions are actually really good. But because a lot of people say, well, it's a lifestyle, therefore you don't deserve to be paid well. It's like, well, not quite like that, is it?
Not at all.
Your life is in my hands at the moment on Kili or a 6,000 meter peak, and that's a lot of responsibility. So yeah, I mean, that's, it's yeah. So that's one thing. I don't know. It's hard. I think because one of your other questions was, people say to you, so when are you going to get a proper job? So it's seeing the outdoor industry as a career. And I think it's only a few people who have said, so in your career in the outdoors, a lot of people go, oh, I'd love to do a job like this because, you're out in amazing places and you're seeing, what have you. And it's like, and I'm also clearing up your sick and your come out the other end.
We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. And dealing with your altitude sickness when you haven't listened to my advice and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's just that recognition that not only UK or Western guides are worth their salt, but the local guides. When you get a good local guide, they are gold dust. They're absolutely. I work with some amazing crews all around the world, and a bigger amount of respect for them. I think actually above everything else I've said is the most important, because we couldn't climb Kili without these guys, or climb 6,000 meter peaks without my Sherpa guides, or they are phenomenal people, and I think respect for them and is really important, and learning their names. Coming from a trip. I mean, I know on Kili with 40 crew, you're not going to learn everyone's names, but learn as many as you can, because that works so well with respect from both sides.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer.
No, I love it. Well, Jo, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And next time you're up in North Wales, you must come and drop by.
Yeah,
we'll go out for a wander somewhere. So if people want to get in contact with you and find out more about what you're up to, where can people do that?
So my website is jobradshaw.co.uk, and there are links there through to my Facebook page, which is Jo Bradshaw Adventurer, or Instagram, which is @_Jo Bradshaw, and I'm also on LinkedIn as Jo Bradshaw. So I have the same profile photo across all three, so quite easy to recognise. So
fabulous. Thanks again, Jo. I'll speak soon.
Great. Thanks ever so much, Tom.
Cheers. Bye-bye. If you've enjoyed this podcast and want to hear the next one, please subscribe. Please share the podcast with your friends and followers. You can also find the Adventure Pro podcast on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook @AdventureProPod.